Good morning, ladies and gentlemen and ladies. My name is Ikaba Koye, and I'm your moderator for today's session on what place for African natural gas in the future mix. I'm just going to briefly present the speakers today, and then we'll move on to our presentation briefly. So today, your speakers will be Yetunde Taiwo, Director, New Energy at Seplat Energy. Amadou Bakayoko, he's the Managing Director of CIE. Linda Mabena Olagunjo, Founder, CEO of DLO Energy Group. Ronan Witrick, Vice President for LNG Business Development of Total Energies. And of course, our expert will be Guillaume Estager. If you could just briefly take a seat. Okay. So, Guillaume, if you could just take the stage, please. So I'd like to introduce to you Mr. Guillaume Estrager. He would give us a 6-minute presentation on his advisory firm. Go ahead.
Good morning, everybody. Many thanks to you, Ikaba. Many thanks to the panel. Let me try to paint a bit where we stand today regarding gas, and especially gas in Africa. I think it's important we keep in mind a few numbers about the specificities of the African continent here. First of all, Africa is accounting for 5% of the world energy demand, only 5%. I think another number that is striking here is that 70% of the people that don't have access to energy, to electricity in Africa, in the world, sorry, are in Africa, 70%. I think also the energy consumption per capita in Africa is 4.5 times lower than it is globally. I think these numbers are striking, and I think it's important to keep that in mind when we talk about energy, and especially about gas. Also, what you can see here is that Africa is only contributing to 4% of the total global CO2 emissions. And then we see definitely that the needs for electrification and energy as a whole are really, really important here. I think 3 challenges an electricity system should address. The first one is about minimizing cost, the cost per kilowatt hour, and the tariff to the end user. I think that's point number 1. That's really important. Point number 2, the electricity system needs to support economic growth and also minimize climate and environmental impact. Here we are looking at 2 scenarios that the International Energy Agency has developed lately. What you see here is basically today, in 2018, the Africa is supplying a bit more than 800 terawatt hour. Then 2 scenarios for 2040. The first one that has been developed is the stated policy scenario, which is based on the current regulation framework. And the second one, which is the Africa case, which is a scenario that is much more ambitious, that is being developed with the African Union here. In these 2 scenarios, the first one, you will see here that the electricity needs will double, by 2040, and in the more aggressive case, the energy needs will triple by 2040. What does it tell us? It tells us that, whatever happens, yeah, the energy needs will grow 2 to 3 times, as I said. Then the energy system will be transformed. That's really clear. We will come back to that. The key question is the speed. This transformation anyhow would have cost and it would have benefits. Then actions are necessary to address these climate aspirations, and all of that is, at the end of the day, a political agenda, and I'm sure the panel will discuss that afterwards. Then gas in Africa. Just a few numbers again. 5% of the share of the gas in the energy sector is in sub-Saharan Africa. Africa as a whole is the 4th largest holder of gas reserves in the world. More than 25 countries have proven natural gas reserves. And over the last recent years, as most of you may know, some major gas discoveries have been made. Let me just name a few. Mozambique, Tanzania in East Africa, Mauritania, Senegal in West Africa, North Africa in Egypt, South Africa, Namibia, obviously in Southern Africa, and many more. But as you can see here on this graph, most of the discoveries that have been done, large chunk of the discoveries in the world have been done in Africa, have been made in Africa. Then, I think, having said all of that, I think it's important to acknowledge that gas and renewable do complement each other. We do believe that gas has a key role to play in the energy mix going forward. It has a key role to play to meet the future energy demand, as we see, that is expected to double or triple even over the coming 20 years. The gas will also have a very important role to play to supply base load capacity. And it's because gas will be able to supply base load capacity that it will be also able to compensate for the intermittent nature of renewable energy. And therefore gas will contribute to the expansion of renewable energy going forward. And obviously will also provide flexible and dispatchable sources of electricity. What you see here in these two scenarios, that hydro plays a key role, PV, solar, wind will play a key role, but gas will be also very, very important going forward. Now, just quickly looking at hydrogen. I think looking at what could happen or what will happen beyond gas. And here we are mainly looking at green hydrogen, which is basically hydrogen produced, through renewable energy sources. Africa can be really competitive. Africa has really competitive advantages here to provide green, large-scale hydrogen. Why? Low cost of electricity, from renewable energy sources. Just to quote a number.
I'm sorry, Mr. Guillaume. Time out.
Yeah, I'm
okay,
done.
if you just finish this point.
I'm done now. Yeah. Then electricity is accounting for 60% potentially of total hydrogen cost. Africa has a lot of land available, access to water as well, proximity to Europe, which is a growing market, and also an important factor, especially for Northern Africa. There's an existing gas pipeline network that can be used to transport hydrogen going forward. So what you can see here in the map is the importance of Africa as potential to produce hydrogen. Last thing, and then to move to the panel. Let me leave you with this quote from Mo Ibrahim. That's a statement he made a couple of months ago during a high-level dialogue between Africa and the EU. And I think it pictures very well what the debate is about. I think you can all see that on the slide, yeah? And I'm sure the panel will debate about that going forward.
Thank you very much, Mr. Guillaume Estager, on that very engaging presentation on renewable and gas. I'm sorry for the interruption. As you know, there are time limits. That was excellent. Now, we're moving on to our main point of discussion today. So the topic is what place for African natural gas in the future mix? That is the discussion. So our main points will be batteries and green hydrogen, and more broadly, how technological innovations are impacting investments in African gas. I would like to start with you, Mr. Bakayoko. In your view, how feasible is it to incorporate technological innovations in the African gas sector right away?
Obviously, those two technologies that you highlighted are going to have an increasing importance in the future. So for us, the idea is that, for example, hydrogen, any new plant starting from 2021 will have the ability, any natural gas plant, to also work with hydrogen. 50% of the capacity. That's a commitment we made. It's an investment. There's no clear route now to sourcing hydrogen yet. So it's added cost that we did, but it opens up new business model in the future. It opens up new opportunities. So that's one way we help this move forward. Now, regarding batteries, obviously now you have a widespread usage of battery for mobility, and in energy you have that for clients, industrial or local clients, not yet at the grid level. I mean, it's only starting. So on that part, we're witnessing what are happening in other countries. California, for example, has been very aggressive in terms of deploying batteries. So we're looking at what's happening. It's difficult to be too front ahead for those new technologies. It costs a lot. So if you think about what's going to happen in 15 years, someone needs to pay for that. And in our economies, you don't always have the time to be able, to fund this discovery. Just to give an example, in 2005, I was working on a study about the future of renewable, and we had several scenarios for solar. One was 10 years, the other one was 22 years. And so if you look 2005 to today, 17 years, solar is widespread. So it's always difficult to be too advanced in those technologies, but you need to make the right bets, which is what we're trying to do.
Great. And moving on to Madam Alagundru, so do you agree? Are there costs and logistical constraints that we need to be mindful of?
I think if you look at the pricing of renewable energy, as an example, when it started, the tariffs were exceptionally high. One, it was a new technology, very few people understood it, and we had what we called feed-in tariffs. If you see how the pricing has dropped over the years, in South Africa, as an example, we have solar now with our last bidding round at below 60 cents, which is quite a competitive tariff. That's 60 cents in rands. Other places in Africa that don't have utility-scale solar projects, you see that the pricing is still a bit higher than the South African market. Insofar as battery storage, my view on that is it's a bit complex depending on where you are and how much space you have. Because, the bigger the project, the more bigger the size of the battery that you're going to use, and you need availability of land. Secondly, from a pricing perspective, we are seeing that battery pricing is expected to drop in future. But right now, relying solely on battery as a backup to solar can be very costly to clients. So we often recommend for our clients a mixture of solar with a gas backup, depending on the accessibility of gas.
Great, Mrs. Alagundru. So, Madam Tayo, besides investments and incorporating technological investments, would you say there are environmental challenges, and are there other factors on a national level holding back African countries?
If I listen to what Linda said, particularly about battery storage, and of course we know the source of most of the battery comes from mined minerals, cobalt as well as titanium. So it automatically tells you that the way these ores are mined is not also in a very environmentally friendly way. And in addition to that, the social angle of it, which is the fact that, they are mined under certain inhuman conditions. It makes you wonder if that's the way we want to go. So we need to look at the whole mix, just like Linda mentioned. Amadou also made a reference to the cost of renewable and how it should be competitive with other sources of power, particularly when you're looking at gas.
Great. Mr. Witterick, with your focus on liquefied natural gas from Total, what is your perspective?
First, thank you for the invitation. I'm very glad to be here. Gas is a transition fuel, as was shown in the presentation. There is no doubt about that. The only problem for gas, it's rather difficult to transport. As we know, we cannot go through pipeline everywhere, and Nigeria is a good example of how to monetize the gas resources through LNG. We believe that LNG is a good complement for developing renewable energies as well. We're trying to develop some projects in Africa, in South Africa, for example. And also, I want to emphasize that the intermittency of solar is really the critical issue here. And as you cannot have gas by pipeline or from your own sources everywhere, the flexibility of the LNG is really helping that to develop. And with the Ukrainian crisis, we are in Europe experiencing that in the hard way these days, because in our job now, we need to find new ways to bring additional LNG to Europe, which we will, of course. But I'm subscribing very much to the last sentence by Mo Ibrahim, and we are, as a company and as a matter of fact, very eager to develop the gas resources, but also to use the gas resources in Africa.
Great. So Mr. Witterick mentioned a little bit on solar panels, and so coming from a clean energy background, do you have anything to add?
Sorry, to add to?
To add to Mr. Witterick's
Yes, I think there tends to be this misconception that there's a direct opposition between gas and clean energy and renewables. I'm a renewable energy company owner and clean energy lady, if I can call it that. However, I believe firmly that gas forms a huge part of that mix, of our energy mix, for the countries that have that available resource. The challenge we have in our country, in South Africa, as an example, there hasn't been a clear gas policy. We've discovered reserves, as was mentioned in the introduction. However, we have not set a clear regulatory policy on how we're going to explore those resources. If you recall, after COP26, there was a freeze on funding gas, and there was a lot of backtracking shortly after that when the war in Ukraine started. And now we are seeing gas being viewed as a clean energy source, and we're starting to see markets opening up and bankers starting to open up to funding gas projects. But the key thing is the transportation, as was mentioned, and how to create a market. So a market like South Africa, we've only said 3,000 megawatts of our power is going to be procured from gas. That's not a big enough market. We need to do a bit more.
Yes. Mrs. Taiwo, you're coming from Nigeria. What would you say are the constraints in terms of technological innovations, in terms of where governments and authorities and suppliers are concerned?
Yeah, so, excuse me, mainly in Nigeria, of course, because of the huge gas resources we have, we are dependent, more or less on gas to power. But like you've heard, the infrastructure network is not particularly at par with the type of volumes and the type of resources that we have. And so there are technologies. I mean, he talked about LNG, and that's also been done in Nigeria on a domestic basis and not necessarily for export. So this helps to take gas to demand centers, excuse me, where the pipeline network is not available. We also use in CNG, which is, compressing the natural gas from source to the demand centers. And these are technologies that are not necessarily in the kind of scale that we would want, but it is helping to at least connect the demand centers to the supply centers. And there are other technologies coming up. I mean, renewable, like she said, is meant to complement gas. So you find that there are quite a number of projects where we have gas to power energy being augmented with either solar or even with other sorts of renewable energy. So the technology will grow. I mean, we've seen more and more players coming in the virtual pipeline space, trying to make sure that there is energy that is affordable, that is also available, and also for people to be able to pay, so that the continent, particularly Nigeria, can also enjoy some economic benefits.
Mr. Bakayoko, I saw you nodding your head to Mrs. Taiwo there. Would you have anything to add?
Yes, there's probably one thing that we sometimes forget. You don't need, especially in neighboring countries, to export gas itself. You can export electricity. That's one way also to make the gas available for other countries. We have a West African power pool through which we're connected. Now, we're connected and exchanging electrons daily with Ghana, Burkina Faso, Mali, Sierra Leone, and in the future, Liberia and Guinea, which are already connected. So there's also this part of the technology that, at least on a regional basis, that could be a way to make a better use of gas. And probably second technological issue is that there's a lot of oil being produced where gas is not used. Gas is wasted. And so this is also one way to improve the availability of gas, to make sure that this associated gas is produced, and especially for the energy sector. And in our cases, it drives the cost down when you have this associated gas that's produced while you're producing oil. So those two are also important technological aspects that could help have gas more impact in the region.
Okay, that brings on to our next point. Thank you. Non-producing countries, should they bet everything on renewable energy? I'll start with you, Mr. Hedwick. Is this feasible? I mean, does it work? Should we bet everything?
Of course, you cannot build solar everywhere, and you cannot go away from the intermittency if you are on that field. Now, having said that, of course, the first thing you need to do in a country, and I think in every country it's true, is to use your own resources, and that's true. And I was listening to the South African example, and we are developing a gas field in South Africa. Obviously, we want to develop that field for South Africans. Now, we will not build a pipeline from the south to Johannesburg only for that volume. So that's the difficulty. So betting on renewables, it's no longer a bet, it's a must, I would think. There is no other way. We do it in our companies, we change the name of the company. It's not by chance. I mean, it's really by our real willingness to do that. We are developing today, we have in production 300 megawatt in Africa globally, and we have a pipeline of project of 1,300 megawatt of solar with batteries or without batteries. So we are really betting a lot on that ourselves for the country. But more than that, we are trying to complement our investment by developing I would say the hybrid solution, what I call the hybrid solution, which is when you have a bit of hydro, a bit of solar, or a bit of gas, you have actually a good mix so that you can, or wind even, offshore wind, you have the right mix that you can rely on. So yes, the bet is no longer a bet, it's a must.
So the bet is no longer a bet. So Mr. Bakayoko, I actually wanted to ask you, sorry, I just mind.
If you allow me for a second, maybe I want to complement that.
Yes, I specifically wanted to ask you the implications there might be when it comes to relying on renewables on the continent.
Well, maybe just as to finish what he was saying, there's a regional aspect to gas. If you look at countries producing gas in Africa, you have Northern Africa, which is the bigger one. You have West Africa, which is also doing a big thing. And you're starting to have some localized, like Mozambique and some in the region, which means that when you're talking about non-producing countries, it's based on where they are. Because if you have around neighbors with a lot of gas resources, obviously in those countries you could strike deals with them and be able to use the gas. Now, regarding renewable, obviously it will be based on the resources you have in your country, the level of light you have to have a good price on the solar you're going to produce or wind. If you look at our region, for Ivory Coast, at least for now, we don't have that much capacity in terms of wind. You are looking at biomass also. It's interesting, but there's a cost component to it. The logistics need to be organized to have enough volume and secure the supply, because you're going to fund 20-year your plants, and you need to make sure that you're going to have, for 20 years, this level of resources. So it's really, first, regarding gas, regional approach, and then second, based on what the countries has as natural resources, then they can finalize their renewable strategy. But you really have to be pragmatic, I think, in terms of those objectives that you want to meet. Statistics, if you look the last 10 years, the countries that use gas have increased access 3 times more than the countries that doesn't have gas, which means that the last 10 years has proved that gas has been an accelerator to energy access. So you have to be pragmatic.
Great. Mrs. Tayo, Mr. Bakayoko spoke a lot about pragmatism. So should countries need to balance out what works for them, in your opinion?
I think countries need to work out the economics that works for them in order to provide affordable and available power for their countries or for the people. And this will anchor on the scale as well as the speed. So you want to cover up the gaps you have with the deficiency in power. And so you probably would not be able to wait 20 years for the technology that is still evolving. Of course, for the renewable space, solar, wind, there is a lot of advancement in technology in those. And it gives the opportunity for countries that don't have gas to actually jumpstart the transition to renewables. But having said that, it needs to be done on a pragmatic basis, like you said. Cost is an issue, timing is an issue, and the effect of what it does to the economy in terms of social as well as development needs to be put in that perspective. So for countries that don't have gas, I mean, in Africa, for example, we have collaboration that already happens. There's this West African gas pipeline, which takes gas from Nigeria to Ghana, and there is a new one that is being forwarded that goes from also Nigeria to the north. So you can rely on economies of scale for countries that don't have it, but it has to be based on affordability and accessibility.
Great, Mrs. Tayo. Mrs. Olagundru, I know you have a lot of opinions on the social and economical implications on countries as well. So should we take into account each country's resources and what resources it has, in your opinion?
Most definitely. When one plans their energy resource, we call it an integrated resource plan, and each country then looks at what available sources of energy are there. I want to touch a bit on some of the things that were raised by the other panelists. On the power pools that were mentioned a lot in collaboration, I think it's important to still highlight power pools remain an old boys club for utilities and the utility model, no offense. So a lot of IPPs that are independent power producers are left out of that participation. And I think what needs to happen on the continent at a wide scale is the acceptance that utilities are not going to be the only producers of power, and they're in direct competition with us as IPPs. And the competition is not necessarily that we shut each other out from each marketplace. We have a different client profile. We're seeing in South Africa right now, Eskom is struggling to keep up with providing power to its biggest clients, which are the mines, and they are reaching out to the private sector. But now the key thing is, how do we as private IPPs export our energy regionally? And power pools remain very closed to that concept because somehow they think the two are mutually exclusive. On the matter of energy and socio-economic development, it's critical. I think one of the things we forget is that energy is not a nice to have, it's a human right. It's not just important on a social basis, but at a macroeconomic level, because countries without access to power have been shown to perform poorly economically. So the stats that were given at the start of this presentation about access to power and Africa rating at the bottom speak volumes to our economic development. We cannot industrialize, we cannot develop as a continent without access to power. That being said, if governments are spending money on making power programs accessible, it is critical to us as Africans that we benefit from those programs. Meaning, are we creating local manufacturing? Are we creating and supporting innovation? Are we building the engineers that can actually build these projects from start to finish? I think when we think about the just energy transition, we need to look at this and interrogate the quality of jobs that are coming, the quality of entrepreneurs that are being produced. We see a lot of funding coming into renewable energy, but I often wonder how many local developers are being produced from that funding.
Probably, since I was mentioned, you allow me to add few things. Actually, in Ivory Coast, we have a different view of that. More than 50% of the capacity is IPPs. And right now, there's about 1 gig being either built or developed through IPPs that are going to participate in the pool. So actually, we're exporting, and a big part of it comes from IPPs. So in our case, we don't see as they're outside, they're inside. It's a system. We need to provide energy to our clients, and it comes from several sources, just to add this little...
Great.
Well,
Yes, go
maybe
ahead.
I add a point on that
Yes.
one as well. I
Yes.
think what is important is to have the clear rules about wheeling. I mean, we know how to transport gas, and very soon, as you have a network of gas pipeline, you have a third-party access to it. And that has been the case everywhere where there is a huge gas pipeline network. Wheeling is the mean by which you will be able to reach a customer through the system. And that's what we need to develop. South Africa is a good example in that respect. There are wheeling rules. So we should be able, to access the market, even from a different country. I'm working on a project in Mozambique, for example, and this is another point I wanted to make. It's not because you are a gas producer that you don't need to use the gas through LNG. We have the examples like that in Brazil, for example, where it's a big gas producer, but still there are places where it's easier to access through LNG. Mozambique is another case in that particular example as well.
Ms. Taiwo, would you like to add on that from Nigeria's perspective? On the
Definitely.
constraints?
I mean, the issue about collaboration, which you mentioned, is one that I think Africa can benefit from. For example, power being generated from a hub setting and being exported to countries that don't really have gas, but also have the need for access to power is one thing that I think as a continent should actually be the discussion of either getting power access around the continent or drawing from those who have the expertise, who have the resources, and who have excess and can actually export what is being generated within their country. And I think in Nigeria, as an example, we have some models like that where power generated in Nigeria is exported just because there is collaboration between the neighboring countries. And more of that should actually be happening in the continent and not being specific to countries, but being more of a voice that helps to get access to the whole of the continent.
Great. So that leads us to our next point. So access to finance, green autonomy, and grid connection. So we talk about, the feasibility and constraints of renewables, etc. But what about the pricing? I mean, can Africa afford this? So the next point is, how can the price of offshore gas be competitive with renewables? I'll start with you, Madam Olagundru. You have. I know you have a big opinion on that. Are we being realistic discussing pricing now? Does Africa have obstacles needed to be tackled first?
I think on the matter of gas pricing and renewables, it's very important to understand that gas is subject to price fluctuations. It's priced in dollars. So you open yourself to those currency risks when you are dealing with purchasing gas, unless you are negotiating your pricing well enough at an early stage, but you need volume for that. So a country like South Africa, where in our IRP we've budgeted for 3,000 megawatts to come from gas to power, it doesn't give us much of a flexibility. Renewables, as I said in the beginning, started off very expensive in our country. The prices have gone down. I think the last study I looked at, a new renewable plant powered by wind, as an example, was 40% cheaper than a new coal build, right? So with renewables, you eliminate the resource price fluctuation, whether it's coal, whether it's gas, whether it's oil, you're taking away that price fluctuation because you're relying on the natural free resource, right? But be that as it may, where we sit in our country and on our continent right now, we're going to need a resource plan that is reflective of powering our countries, getting us to a place where there isn't a deficit as much. Some countries in Africa have done well. Kenya, for example, has managed to achieve great tariffs, and also they are going to be on target to meet 100% of their power being from renewables by 2030. So I think it's a balancing act, and that's important to understand. How you buy your resource depends largely on the market you've created as well. If you're only going to budget for 3,000 gigs, you're not going to have much to negotiate with.
Okay, Mr. Bakayoko, I know that you agree on that as well.
I think probably what we all doing on a daily basis is managing risk and opportunities. Obviously, there's a risk, as you said, if you're not producing gas, that there may be fluctuation in the prices. But when you flip the coin on the other side, at the end of the day, you have clients, you have consumers, you have corporates. Corporates know how much it costs when you don't have energy. For example, in Ivory Coast, it would cost 20 cents of dollar to produce through your generator and purchase your diesel to produce your own power. But through the network, you're only paying 11, 12 cents. So obviously, if the projections are telling you that in the future, to secure this production, which is much less than the generator, this is the price for the future, you're going to say, oh, it makes sense for me to go in this way. For our case, since we have gas, it's not the case, but go to another country without gas, there's a risk of a fluctuation on one side, but the bigger risk is for the economy, not have enough energy. So I'd rather in those countries, make a tough decision about, in this country, this is the price, but it's less than diesel and generators, and secure the sourcing. And as we say, with collaboration, with some project, you could secure the source, the combustible. Probably it's more pragmatic from my perspective to have this vision of looking at the bigger picture, your end clients, and seeing something that generates enough electricity to make sure that they're happy and at a price that's competitive to the other sources that they have.
Okay. Mr. Wittrick, from Europe's perspective, looking in to develop gas renewables, what's your opinion on pricing and its feasibility?
I feel like I'm starting to negotiate gas supply with with potential buyers here, and I wouldn't like to do that in front of everybody. Of course, the gas price, as rightly put out, is an international price now. It's more generally in dollar, except when you have a very local market. but it goes up and down. The most expensive energy is the one you don't have, basically. And so you know, you have to have that long-term vision. Today, at $30 a million BTU, of course, electricity from gas is rather more expensive than solar. If I take the example of South Africa, 3 days ago, that was not 3 years ago. Sorry, that was not the case. In 5 years from now, you don't know. It's as was put out by Mr. Bakayoko. It's really a mix that you need to work on. Now, if you are interested, however, in buying some gas, please feel free. I'm here. Come and we'll check on that.
Would you like to add to that, Mr. Bakayoko? You were nodding.
Yes, so
quite
I was going to
yes.
say that,
Yes.
I mean, for a country like Nigeria, gas is still relatively a cheap source
Yes.
of energy, especially if you are using it within the country. Not subject to much price variations because it's regulated. But the real benefit of it is the fact that there are derivatives of gas, which also help to make it more attractive rather than just focusing on just the raw price of gas. And I think that's where the country is going in by saying that, look, there are many other derivatives. I mean, the LPG we use, which mainly displaces the biomass that is used for cooking, is also a product of gas. So generally, we see gas as being the cheapest source of energy for Nigeria at the moment. Not to say that we do not have a plan for renewables. There is plan, but it's more of a complementary source of energy till we get to a point where net zero needs to happen. I mean, we saw the outlook that was shown that even in 2050, when net zero should have happened, we still have a sizable amount of gas being used as a source of energy.
And so you touched a bit on alternative renewable options, but is that feasible for the whole of the continent? Are you just specifically touching on Nigeria? With regards to alternative, more logical, affordable renewable resources, are you saying that it's feasible for all of the continent, or is it a case-by-case basis?
I think it's feasible for the most of the continent. I mean, gas is gas. I mean, and if you're using it domestically for energy, you have that leverage of control as to how pricing should go. And so that's where government intervention does come in to make it available and affordable for the people to actually use.
Fantastic. Mr. Bakayoko, you have been nodding quite a bit throughout, so do you have anything to add?
I think, as he was saying, and I was saying, you need to look at the bigger picture. For example, one preconception is that it's going to be difficult to get funding for gas, for example. But at the end of the day, the question is, what are the economics? Do we have a sound off-taker which is able to price correctly, to recover the money, and to pay back the investment? This, I think, is more critical than all the perceptions, because at the end of the day, when banks are going to make decisions, being based either in the US, Europe, or in Africa, they're going to look at a sound business plan. And so I think this part also, the more serious the country will be in planning and having good results and being able to demonstrate the value and where they're going, they're going to find funding also.
Great. And just, I think we need to delve into green taxonomy a little bit. I just want to get a bit of all of your perspective on green taxonomy. Let me start with you. What is your perspective? Do you have a perspective on green taxonomy for Africa?
Yeah, it's a bit of a, I mean, it depends on what you're looking at, because there's if you're talking about carbon tax and carbon trading, there's a lot of artificiality going on. So you find a lot of people outsourcing their responsibilities to Africa, as an example. So someone will build a power station somewhere else that's a green energy source and buy that carbon tax certificate and offset it against their carbon emissions. The other thing we need to be mindful of as a continent, it was said earlier, most of the mining of the resources that go into the production of renewable energy are mined on this continent. Therefore, that automatically then increases our emissions because of how we extract those resources. So Africa is now left saddled with the responsibility and the price of this green energy transition. So I think we really need to be careful. But if I can also touch a bit on the gas matter, prior to moving on to this point on the green tax, it's important to also keep in mind what's happening with the gas reserves in Africa. Europe has gone to lock up a lot of deals on this continent to secure its energy supply. Total in Mozambique, Germany and Italy, elsewhere on the continent, Angola, Nigeria is being targeted. I think the question for us as Africans is what is being done to secure our domestic product for our own use. And it gives me concern that there's not enough strategic thinking around that. And we're going to find ourselves in a situation where we've signed deals and we're left without a resource for ourselves. Sorry to deviate, but I thought...
No, that's fine. That was actually my intention. Mrs. Taiwo, would you like to add to that, coming from Africa's biggest oil-producing country?
Well, I would first start with the issue of green tax. I mean, global warming is really a phenomenon that affects the whole world. And so if there is a mechanism, and that's what this carbon trading does, for less developed countries to be incentivized in actually, towing the narrative of reducing greenhouse gas emissions and getting to a point where, temperatures are less or equal to 1.5 degrees, then it should be encouraged. I think the issue, like Linda said, is making sure that, it's being understood as a motive for actual activities to reduce emissions and not seen as a means for enriching developing countries. Of course, the issue of double dipping comes in because there needs to be clear monitoring to be sure that countries who are benefiting from it are not really, just window dressing, but actually reducing the emissions that they are creating. So to the point about, what was that?
Gas pricing. She mentioned. Yeah.
Sorry. So that's about funding, really. And, sometimes when I think about most of the gas developments that get sanctioned, they are mainly exports. And, of course, it does not benefit the countries that are actually producing it. So I think that, like some countries have done, especially in Nigeria, you make it a conditional sanction. So as you are funding export projects, you have a commitment or an obligation to also fund gas development within the country. And it's been done, like I said, in Nigeria. The only challenge is that the infrastructure that really should be the backbone for gas distribution, the network, and all the accessories necessary to ensure that gas does get to where it is not as strong as it should be. And so if we had policies where, before you can sanction a foreign project, you also are obligated to develop and also, fund projects internally, we see that, offshore gas projects as well as development for energy within the countries also gets done. And I think it can be done.
Mr. Wittrick, is it feasible green taxonomy on African countries?
I think there are two issues here. One is the funding, and the other one is the use of the resources for the country. If I want to answer first on the second part, this is what we do everywhere almost where we are present. You look at Mozambique, for example, is a case where we are developing, yes, a big field for export, but you don't have a consumption for 60 TCF of gas in Mozambique. I mean, it doesn't exist. So it might exist globally. And by the way, we don't sell it to Europe, we sell it to Asia, that gas. But we have a commitment to really develop the Mozambique system as well, in as much as we are developing a gas terminal where we will bring gas from outside Mozambique into Mozambique as well. So you see, we have that preoccupation very much. I was working on that in '87 in Myanmar, you know, where we had that commitment as well. It's everywhere almost when we are developing projects for export. On the green taxonomy, I think the Ukraine crisis, if we may call it that, or the Ukraine war, if you wish, has changed completely the picture on that front. And now it's more about security of supply and to be as green as you can, of course, because as I said earlier, it's not a choice, it's a duty. But at the same time, enable the development and the security of supply. So there is we've sensed a very quick shift in the last few months from the bank side on that, which I welcome, of course. Now, it shouldn't relieve us from our obligation to look at the future in terms of green energy. So that's the other side of the coin. It's not because we have access to more, I would say, money than what we thought we would have without that war, that we should spoil the drive for a greener economy.
Thank you. I just want to bring your perspective in, Mr. Bakayoko, on green taxonomy.
Green taxonomy, the idea is at the end of the day, someone's paying. Because you creating a fiscal incentive to change people's behavior. This fiscal incentive is going to generate more cost. So either it's your economy that's paying this cost, which means that people are paying energy, you know, at a higher price, and if they want to be competitive, it can become a problem. Or it's someone else which is funding it. Now, there's two ways someone else could be funding it. It could be NGO or, you know, grants. But grants could work for 1 year, 2 years, and as he said, one day there's Ukraine war, and there's no longer funding. And the other part is emission reduction because they have legal compliance, that at least you have some visibility on the fact that this funding is going to be stable. But if there's a major crisis, even that at some point could be relieved. Because if the countries, in those countries, from an economic standpoint, doesn't work for them, they're going to change the law. And so your source of funding for this is going to disappear. So you really have to think hard about this. It's important, as they said, but at the end of the day, it's resilience. You want to be able, in the future, to be able to withstand the crisis that comes. So make sure that you do the right strategy, that tomorrow you don't stand still, and people have changed their views, and you're stuck in your strategy.
Great, and on that note, let's move on to the Q&A. We've got roughly under 8 minutes. Does anyone have a question to the speakers today? If you could just raise your hand. Yes, the gentleman in the maroon tie, just over there.
In the dark suit.
Yes.
Thank you very much. My name is Landry. I work for the Danish DFI, IFU. Thank you very much for the good presentation and the good discussion, very insightful. The question to the panel, and maybe a suggestion for like a topic for another time, right? Because I'm not sure you can answer in 30 seconds. We have discussed gas, right? Green taxonomy. But then the takeout is we should consider gas as a transitional energy. Then how do we finance it? Because, I mean, a substantial part of the financing from now is coming from abroad, right? And can you also say something about the risk of stranded assets going forward? Because if we finance gas power plant now, at some time we need to sort of either refinance them or do something about it. But if the one that could refinance eventually are not interested in this type of asset, how do you see it going forward? That's my question. Thanks.
Who are you directing this question to?
Whoever wants to take it.
I'll take one part of the question and I'll open up to my more learned colleagues on gas. But on the matter of financing gas, there has been an about turn, but there remains to be a bit of uncertainty on what the market is going to look like beyond a 15-year horizon, right? And that's what you're talking about, because these are long-term PPAs, typically 20 years. What happens in between, let's say the next 5 to 10 years? Whilst we are seeing the war in Ukraine, it's not going to last forever. And how do funders wrap their minds around this? I think there should be some comfort in gas being considered by the European Union as a clean energy source now. That gives it a bit of validity in terms of how the banks, I think, are going to treat it. And ESG boards have also had to turn, their perceptions on it. But beyond a certain period, I wonder myself how gas is going to be treated 30 years from now. So I don't think I have the exact answer, but I think there's a bit of a horizon view for the next 15, 20 years, as long as the PPA exists. That's the security risk that you run. As long as you have that PPA in place, I think you're covered as a lender. But beyond that, I don't know what happens to those gas assets.
If you look at history, a few hundred years ago, the Rothschilds, which is a very famous finance family, they started in one country, and then in a few years, they were able to secure funding for infrastructure for the other countries. You look 100 years ago, Russia infrastructure, the railroads, was funded by some French taxpayers or French people that, bought obligations. So international funding of infrastructure has been around for hundreds of years. So at the end of the day, is it the risk-adjusted return of the people that are funding it? That's the only thing that costs. If they believe that it's an environment where their money is going to be properly used based on the mandate they have, be it a development agency, be it a private equity firm, whatever, is this a sound business plan? So if we make sure that we structure our opportunities in Africa as sound investment deals, we're going to find the money.
Okay, great. So let's move on to our next question from the audience. Anybody? We've got roughly from the lady in the beautiful attire, purple attire. Just here up front.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, that was the wrong lady, sorry. Where am I? Oh, you. Are you speaking?
Yes, please.
Oh, okay, I can't see your... Go ahead.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, panelists. My question is around the energy situation in Africa. I wanted to know how aggressive are the operators in the energy space to take advantage of opportunities within the African market segment. Years ago, we had the Power Africa initiative, and there was a lot of focus around powering different aspects of the African continent. If I use the example of Nigeria, I mean, that is the largest population in Africa of people. That is Africa's largest economy, but you have significant power infrastructural challenges. So I'm wondering, where are the Africa-focused investors in this market segment, and why is that not a focus, knowing that whatever happens in that market impacts on the rest of Africa? What are the ambitions? Thank you.
Okay, let's keep the answers quite short. So who would like to answer that?
I think the initiative to Power Africa is still on. I mean, I was just talking to Linda about it. And one of the challenges really, like you all know, is financing. So I think as a continent, there needs to be a repackaging of how we want to move along on this journey. If it means, I don't know, maybe we have like an African energy bank that could actually push and support internal funding within Africa.
And on that note, I'm sorry to say we have run out of time, as much as I would like to hear more. Thank you so much for joining us with all our wonderful speakers. It's a pleasure to have you all. That's the end of the the session. Now I'm going to pass on the next session, which is going to be with Larry Madowo, CNN's international correspondent. Thank you, all speakers.